Name is Morgan Hampel, originally from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Ended up here in San Diego by means of the Navy. Was active duty for about 10 years, served a couple of years in the reserves. While active duty, I got started in real estate investing out in Charleston, South Carolina when I was stationed out there. And then from there, got into larger multifamily in Iowa and Texas. And then today, I'm currently working as the VP of Capital Formation here at Comfort Capital, where I work with and meet with various investors of all different walks, backgrounds, and create plans in investing in mobile home parks and other real estate assets. I'd always been pretty entrepreneurial, and starting pretty early in my career in the Navy, I was trying to figure out how can I didn't know what I wanted to do after the Navy, but at some point in time, everybody always gets out. And so my whole plan was to figure out how could I replace my income by the time I got out, so I didn't have to get a regular corporate job on the backside of the Navy. And pretty early in my career, I discovered what the VA loan was. And back in 2018, I bought my first house out in Charleston, South Carolina. It was a 4-bed, 2.5 bath. I bought it for around $210,000. I lived in one room. I rented out 3 rooms to buddies. Each one of them were paying me about $500 a month, which was cheap for them, but collectively it was covering my entire mortgage and then cash flowing about $300-400 a month. And that's really how I caught the bug on having, didn't really come from much, and really putting money in the driver's seat and having your money work for me, vice having to work for money. And after that house was when I really started diving into, okay, what else can I do to help kind of grow and, multiply these types of systems. In college, me and a bunch of buddies, we were constantly trying to start companies. The whole goal, once again, was try to build passive income. When you're 18, 19, 20 years old, you don't really have any experience in literally anything. And so the method we were taking was like, all right, let's try to find an industry where we think there could be some means of improvement and, a business angle. And we just started picking up the phones. And so we would Google, we started off with, HVAC, we did plumbing, we did paralegals, and we would, cold call literally dozens, if not hundreds, over a period of time. We would Google Denver HVAC companies, or Denver, we ended up going with speech therapy down the line, and then or Chicago speech therapy, Minneapolis speech therapy, and then we would just call the top 10 clinics, and we would just talk to these people and tell them hey, we're working on a school project. So we try to take our guard down and just get to know them and dive into, what were your pain points. Needless to say, 6 months before graduation, after having attempted probably 4 or 5 different industries, and having failed, the last industry we attempted before graduation was speech therapy, where none of us were speech therapists. We have no ties to speech therapy, but one of our co-founders' girlfriends had an internship in speech therapy, and she complained about the paperwork. So that's why we tried it. And so we just started calling countless numbers of speech therapists, and we ended up talking to enough. And, one of the questions we would ask is, walk us through your typical day. And then we just try to dive into these pain points. And when we did, over probably a 60-day period, probably had 100 hours of recorded interviews, we figured out what, it was like, hey, we got about 75-80% of these calls that we're having have a very similar pain point. And that was our business idea. And needless to say, that was 6 months before graduation when we started. We, ended up we applied for and got accepted into a business accelerator. My 2 co-founders actually dropped out of school for our last semester. I couldn't, because I was on a delayed entry program with the Navy. And we went through that accelerator. We raised a bunch of money for our seed round investing, used that money to build out our initial, MVP, our beta software. And we launched our company pretty much right at graduation. Once I took off for the Navy, my buddies back in Iowa were still building and growing the business, and had hit a critical mass where they needed to raise kind of a seed series, or Series A, maybe, if you will, equivalent round. But being a co-founder, I still owned a decent amount of the equity. And so I was kind of given a choice where, hey, I need to step away and let these guys get some room to breathe and room to run on the cap table as, a carrot to raise more capital, or force them to find new money. And so I ended up just walking away to give those guys a fighting chance at keeping the business going. And ever since I did that, I was trying to figure out okay, well, that was, and it was a tough pill to swallow at, around 21, 22 years old, having to walk away from something that, I had helped build, but it really lit a fire in me that I already had, but really expanded. It gave me some additional extrinsic motivation, if you will. It was like, I did it once, I can do it again. And that discovery of the VA loan ended up kind of being the epiphany I needed. It was like, oh, wait, I don't have to build a software company to do this. I can go invest in real estate and have money work for me while I'm active duty, going from duty station to duty station. So I was on my first duty station, stationed here in San Diego from 2015 to 17. Once again, I had just walked away from that software startup that I did in college with my buddies, having just got home from deployment. And I was still, pretty, I would say, disappointed that I had missed out on that. Just the Navy had gotten in the way, as it does a lot of things, of, that side of my entrepreneurial spirit. But it really forced me to find alternative means of investing, which is what brought me to finding the VA loan. Eventually, I had gotten orders to Charleston, South Carolina, which is a really great market. I reached out to a realtor, reached out to a couple lenders, try to figure out the Charleston market, wanted to get something close to base, something that once I left, because I knew I was only going to be there for 18 months to 2 years, something that I could rent out to other military members once I left. And then I honestly, we just read a bunch of books. So one that really helped me out here was a Bigger Pockets book. I think it's literally called the book on long distance real estate investing. And it taught you, well, how can you underwrite a deal, find a deal, and do a bunch of due diligence without actually ever seeing the property. And it was funny, actually, through the help of my realtor, through the help of a lot of FaceTime and a lot of trial and error, we found the property that I liked. It was about 10 minutes from base, and got it under contract, and we closed on it the day I got into Charleston. And so I moved straight into my house, and I had set up a whole bunch of meetings with my buddies and had all my friends move in, or 3 of my friends move in pretty much right away once I closed on the deal. What that first deal really afforded me, so that was the first time of my young adult life that my expenses just got cut dramatically. I didn't have any living expenses because I wasn't paying my mortgage. And so for those 12 to 18 months, everything that I would be going to rent or mortgage, I was keeping for myself. And I found myself having more money than I had ever really been able to keep. And so now it really opened my eyes, and I just started hunting for new deals. The next deal I did was a 3-unit in Iowa. And this is where my scarcity mindset, even though my eyes were opening to the opportunity, I still very much had a scarcity mindset. Saving, $1,100, $1,200 a month from not paying a mortgage doesn't make you a millionaire, even though I felt like one, but it allowed me to save really $30,000 over that span of 18 months. And so what I ended up doing was I ended up going 50-50 on a partner, buying a 3-unit in Iowa for $54,000 all cash, because I could afford $30,000 and he could afford $30,000. Granted, at a $54,000 purchase price all in, it eliminates most of the country, and you're not buying high quality real estate, right? I was buying what I could afford, and I wasn't thinking bigger, right? It was very much scarcity mindset. And that deal ended up being a massive blessing in disguise. It was a super tough deal. We ended up probably breaking even on it over a 2-year span, but it wasn't with a ton of mistakes, a ton of headaches, a ton of stress that I really didn't need at the time. But what it forced me to really think, I was like, okay, well, there's a lot of people who make a lot of money in real estate. This was not how they did it. And we all have the same 24 hours in a day. And that was really the turning point. I was like, well, I'm not going to let where I come from dictate where I'm going. In the military, or really with any government job, you have a relatively fixed income. It's like you're in this branch, you're in this rank, and you have this time in service, time in rank. Like, that is your pay. Right, no matter how good or how bad you do, pending you get kicked out, like, that is what you will make. That timeline, adjusted for inflation, was not going to produce enough income for my goal of replacing it by the time I got out of the Navy. After that deal, really through that deal, was when I started to pivot. It's like, okay, how can I do bigger deals? Because people start with nothing. I wasn't starting with really anything. And people start with nothing, and they build these massive portfolios. And what I quickly realized, I was like, real estate's, it's not easy, but it's way easier than it looked like from the outside until I got into it. And so then I was like, I shifted my focus. I learned about this thing called syndication, and all my time, outside time, nights and weekends, was dedicated to figure out, how do you put these deals together? Fast forward to 2021, business partner and I ended up buying our first syndication deal, 68 units. We bought it for $3.7 million, and we raised $1 million, having never raised capital before. Once we decided we were ready, like, okay, you know what, we've done enough research. We met brokers, we met property managers, we met GCs. We figured out, okay, we know enough people in the area and the future team members that we can start chasing deals. So if and when we get one, we'll be ready to go to assemble the team, right? Eventually, as we're underwriting deals, we found a deal we really liked. It was 68 units. It was pretty heavily distressed, probably 70% occupied, maybe 50%, 60% economically occupied. So it's pretty distressed, but it's your classic gross deal in a very nice area is that typical makeup that we liked. And we put an offer in at $3.7 million, $55,000 a door. It was our first time ever making an offer on the sides, and it was with money we didn't have because we intended on raising capital. And when we submitted that offer, we were blown away because it actually got accepted, which is funny to say because we just thought like, okay, we'll start submitting offers. Eventually one will get accepted. And lo and behold, the first offer we made got accepted, which was nuts. And so the broker reaches back out to us. He's like, hey, you guys got the deal. And my business partner and I are like, wait, are we actually going to accept the accepted offer? Like, are we ready to step up to the plate? And the thing is like, once you have that opportunity, like, who knows when we were going to get that opportunity again? When were we going to find the broker, the seller that was, dumb enough, if you will, to give the rookies a chance to actually close and perform on this? So we really didn't have a choice, but it was what we did, it was what we signed up for. But then once we actually won the deal, it was kind of scary. But then, we stepped forward and now, we're on the clock. And so without really having ever done any of this before, leaning on mentors that we had kind of put in place as we were going down this path of figuring out, okay, how do you raise capital? How do you structure your pitch deck? What do you work through? Questions you need to answer with your securities attorney? All that prep work went in motion. And then pretty much anybody who I had ever met at any point in time that I had their phone number or email, got a text or email. And then it was just all about at bats. For us being rookies, for me having a full-time job in the Navy, for my business partner having a full-time job on the other side too, there were countless reasons why you shouldn't invest in this. But we did our best, given the circumstances we had, to de-risk it as much as possible and structure the deal in a way that was as advantageous for investors despite the risks. And we put a lot of money in, a lot of money down to show that we had skin in the game as well. Once again, like I say, it's all about at bats. There's going to be, and there were, a ton of people that said no. And I don't need it, and nobody needs everybody to invest. You just need enough people, right? And so whatever your conversion ratio, if you've been doing this, for 10, 20, 30 years, it's probably pretty high. Or if it's your first deal like me, it's super, super low. You just needed a lot of at-bats, right? You open up all the upside of the deal. You open up all the downside of the deal. You allow every investor going eyes wide open on why they should or why they shouldn't. And in the end, it's their choice. And fortunately enough, we got enough at bats and we were able to convert about 20 investors to help bring in that $1 million. And we actually ended up landing that last, roughly $50,000 check about 3 days before closing. That was going to bring us to the closing table, which was pretty crazy. The saying I always really liked is people always overestimate what you can accomplish in a day, but underestimate what you can accomplish in a month, 2 months, 3 months, or in a year. In that span of time, call it, November of 2020, when we decided, hey, let's go all in on apartment syndication, to June of 2021, 7 month span, we went from idea to market research, building the team, building the plans, building our buy box, submitting an offer, building the pitch deck, creating all the legal documents, the legal structure, and then raising $1 million in 7 months, while each of us had 2 separate full-time jobs. It got to a point where, it's holy crap, look how far we've come. And while you're in it, just feels like a whirlwind, but you end up starting to build momentum, and it becomes more difficult to slow down than it does to keep going because of the momentum you're building and the path that you're on and you're creating for yourself. And so then once we got that first deal under our belt, then it was like, holy crap, we did it with no experience. Like we're real estate operators. We had our first deal. 2 months in, we started giving out cash flow and distributions. And September, so we closed June 2021. September of 2021, we tied up our next deal, 106 units. We raised $2 million that time. And it was off to the races, starting to build letting the snowball grow from there. All of this while active duty. Once we did that second deal, we started, building. It was small, but we started building a track record and a name for ourselves and building a base of investors who knew, liked, and trust us and were willing to give us referrals. And from there, we were able to do larger and larger deals and get larger and larger partnerships. And over the next, from 2021 through 2024, ended up building up a portfolio of around 1,100 units. Once my mindset shifted from the scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset and a mindset of how to expand the pie, it all comes down to, just like in any industry, real estate's no different. It's all about your team, right? So everything, that I bring to the table, everything my business partner brings to the table, any gaps between us, any gaps that I don't bring can be filled by more experienced and other people. And you're never going to identify those soft spots or those gaps until you're actually in the arena and you start having these conversations and working towards a common goal. You're going to start finding yourself alongside like-minded people who have complementary skill sets that actually they'll probably need yours as well. And you start building these partnerships that really help you learn and grow and get into the industry. Looking back from where I started, there was, this phase of just you'd freeze. You'd be so afraid of making a critical mistake that would end your life and ruin everything. And what I quickly learned was, we made a lot of mistakes along the way, but something I always love to say, in any fork in the road, there's 0.1% of a chance that you make a, life crippling mistake that you can't recover from or takes years to recover from. On the same end, there's at every fork in the road, the opportunity of, 0.1%, 0.001%, where you have a life altering home run, you buy Bitcoin in 2010 or whatever it is, and you never have to work a day in your life again. Well, the thing is most decisions that you will make land in that middle 99%, right? And even if you land, your decision is on that bottom half of the, mistake pie, that's all recoverable. And if anything, once you make that mistake and you make that decision that's on the bottom half of that pie, your next 2, 3, 4 steps will be on the right side, and you'll maybe take one step backwards from that mistake, but the next 3, 4 steps will, jumpstart you well into the future, and it'll open up opportunities that you never knew were available because you hadn't seen what was that behind that first door, right? And so yes, it was a mistake. Nobody likes making mistakes, but we're going to make plenty of them. But with every mistake comes a lesson learned, and from those lessons learned, open up new doors of opportunity and the right answers that will get you where you want to go. And that's what I pleasantly surprised myself with despite the mistake after mistake, each one of those led to another fork in the road that was an opportunity to recover and then exceed where I would have been had I never taken that step in the first place. All that being said, over a span of 4 or 5 years, I built up a decent sized portfolio while active duty. While active duty, I was what they call a nuclear surface warfare officer. So I was, working on aircraft carriers in the reactor room, and nuclear engineering was a field that, I enjoyed. I was better at it than honestly I thought I was going to be while I was in the service and in active duty, but I knew it wasn't something I wanted to do for the rest of my life. What started as a little side hustle of getting into real estate really turned into my vehicle off the recommended path, right? Because so many times, especially nuclear officers like myself, it's like, okay, you do your service, you get a great education, you're working in a field that has a lot of demand for it and well-paid jobs. Well, the easy answer is just you step out and you go work in a civilian power plant, you work in the energy sector, you have once again, a high-paid job. But the thing that I didn't want to trade a high-paid, high-time consuming, high-stress job if I was going to leave the service for a high-paid, high-time consuming, high-stress job out of uniform. Once I made that decision of, I'm thankful for my experience and time in nuclear power, but it wasn't going to be my full career, building that portfolio gave me experience that I had to manufacture myself which afforded me an opportunity to work with people who had a much more formal education, a much more traditional background in real estate private equity, I would never be sitting here today. I'd be never have spoken with or worked with these groups in private equity who are doing deals, managing $400, $500 million portfolios, coming from a military background. Like, I'm not supposed to be sitting in this room at this table or with these people, but getting over that fear of taking that first step and making those mistakes is what got me the momentum and the confidence to continue making mistakes, failing quickly, failing often, and recovering to get me eventually where I wanted to go and in the driver's seat of my own career. So if somebody was looking to me saying, how do I start? Where do I start? Or what do I get started with? The first thing is really, you have to start. It could be picking up a book. It could be having a conversation. It could be showing up to a meetup, showing up to a conference, but you have to get in the room and be present alongside people in the industry that you want to explore, right? The path of finding your purpose or your career or your passion is usually a process of elimination, but you will not start eliminating options and start taking swings. So for me, once again, in the real estate world, I didn't get to real estate and now mobile home parks until I failed a paralegal company, failed the HVAC company, failed the plumbing company, left a speech therapy company, tried to start flipping, tried to start wholesaling, and then got into multifamily. And then, you're talking on my 10th rep, did I find mobile home parks, which I'm now passionate about and it's going to be a vehicle I'll be a part of for a very long time. Don't be afraid to start and don't be afraid to pivot, right? But the thing is, you'll never find where you're going until you actually start looking, right? If you sit back and wait for it to come to you, you'll never know what's in front of you, even if it hits you in the face. You have to go on the offensive. You have to play to win. You can't play not to lose, because otherwise you'll never find it.